Daria Howard. I'm 34 years old, and the last time my mother spoke to me, she was standing in the doorway of my childhood bedroom, telling me to pack my things before the police arrived. I was 19. My older brother Nolan had just driven a stolen car into a storefront window, and my parents decided I was going to take the fall. When I refused to confess to a crime I did not commit to protect his record, they changed the locks and told me to lose their number. I spent the next 15 years building a life out of the things other people leave behind. I became an estate liquidator here in Florida. I learned to walk into a house full of neglected items and find the single piece worth saving. More importantly, I learned that toxic people only show up when they think there is something left to take. Welcome back to QT Told Stories, where silence is the best defense and greed always overplays its hand. If you have ever been the scapegoat of your own family, you are in the right place. Drop a comment, tell me your age, and let me know where you are watching from. And be sure to subscribe. This story begins with a 15-year exile, and it ends with a single piece of paper that sent a father to prison. 2 days ago, a clerk at a coastal convenience store recognized my face. He pulled the security footage from his shift, matched it to the state lottery announcement, and sold a tip to the local evening news. My face flashed on screen beside a graphic for a $45 million jackpot. I did not want the money public. Wealth like that does not buy happiness. It buys an audience. The very next morning at 7:15, a silver sedan parked at the end of my driveway. I was standing at my kitchen island drinking black coffee when Gregory and Helen Howard walked up my front steps. 15 years without a phone call, a birthday card, or a text. Now they stood on my porch like they had just stepped out to get the mail. My father knocked. It was the polite, confident knock of a man who expects the door to open for him. I unlocked it. My mother reached out to hug me, wearing a practiced smile that did not reach her eyes. I did not step back. I just stood still, my hands at my sides, until her arms dropped. They invited themselves to the patio table in my backyard. Gregory folded his hands on the glass tabletop. He wore a golf shirt that looked brand new. Helen clutched a designer purse to her chest, her knuckles tight and white. "We saw the news, Daria," Gregory said. His voice was smooth, the tone of a seasoned salesman closing a deal. "We are proud of you, and we want to put the past behind us. Family is family, after all. We came to talk about how we should manage the funds." I let him talk. I poured dark roast coffee into 2 mismatched coastal mugs and set them down. I did not offer sugar. He talked for 5 straight minutes about forgiveness, about blood, and about how they had always planned to split things evenly. It is only fair. He finished looking at me like I owed him a receipt. "We are your parents. We are here for our half." I did not raise my voice. I did not ask where they were when I slept in a bus station for 3 weeks. I simply reached into a manila folder, pulled out a single yellowed document, and slid it across the patio table. Helen leaned forward to read it. She stopped smiling before her eyes reached the second line. Gregory's confident posture vanished, his shoulders going rigid. He stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. It was a signature that belonged to me, but was not written by my hand. The document sat between us on the glass patio table, catching the morning light. It was a standard personal loan agreement dated 15 years ago, issued by a predatory lending company operating out of a strip mall in Tampa. The principal amount was $25,000. The purpose of the loan was not stated on the paper, but I knew exactly where the funds went. Every dollar covered Nolan's bail and subsequent legal defense fees after his joyride through a commercial storefront. At 19, I barely knew how a credit score functioned. I found out 6 months after that loan was taken out, when my landlord handed me a 3-day eviction notice. My credit history had flatlined. Collection agencies called my prepaid cell phone at all hours of the night. I spent the next 4 years clawing my way out of a debt I never accrued. I worked double shifts at a diner, lived out of a duffel bag, and slept on my Aunt Clara's pull-out couch while my parents maintained their pristine suburban lifestyle. I tracked down the original loan documents during my 3rd year of estate liquidation work. I used the investigative skills I learned from hunting down obscure probate records. The signature at the bottom was a clumsy forgery of my name. Helen had always struggled to mimic the sharp loop of my uppercase D. Helen stared at that awkward loop now. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her face looking hollow and gray under her carefully applied foundation. She looked at Gregory, waiting for him to fix the situation. She wanted him to smooth over the undeniable proof of their betrayal. Gregory did not apologize. Toxic people do not apologize when confronted with evidence. They simply change the rules of the game. Gregory leaned back in his chair. The warm, paternal smile vanished instantly. His features hardened into a cold, flat stare. He assessed me not as a daughter, but as a hostile asset standing between him and a fortune. He tapped his index finger against his ceramic coffee mug, a rhythmic, calculating sound. "You kept this," he said. His voice dropped the friendly pitch. It carried the rough edge of a promise. I kept my hands folded in my lap, refusing to match his physical intimidation. "I keep everything, Gregory. In my line of work, paper trails dictate who owns the estate. You forged my signature to bail out your son, ruined my financial standing, and threw me onto the street. You owe me $25,000 plus 15 years of interest. But we can call it even if you walk back to your car and never return to this house." Gregory let out a short, humorless laugh. He stood up, towering over the patio table, casting a long shadow over the forged document. "You think a dusty piece of paper from a defunct loan agency changes anything today, Daria? We are talking about $45 million. That money belongs to the family syndicate." The family syndicate. It was a phrase I had never heard in my entire life. Gregory began pacing the length of my patio, building a narrative out of thin air. He claimed we had formed a verbal lottery pool years ago, before the falling out. He claimed there were emails, digital records of a shared family fund designed to buy tickets. It was a brazen, magnificent lie, spun on the spot by a man who had spent his life talking his way out of consequences. "My lawyer is already drafting the injunction," Gregory said. He pointed a finger directly at my face. "By noon today, a judge will freeze that payout. You will not see a single dime until the State Lottery Commission clears the ownership dispute. And probate courts move very slowly. We can drag this out for a decade. Or you can do the smart thing, honor the family pool and transfer our half the second the funds clear." While Gregory paced and issued legal threats, I watched Helen. She sat rigidly in her chair, her hands gripping her leather handbag. The bag featured a prominent designer logo, the kind meant to project wealth to casual observers. But my trained eyes noticed the frayed stitching near the handle and the worn, scuffed leather at the bottom corners. It was an old bag, desperate to look new. Her hands were trembling. The tremor started in her wrists and traveled down to her manicured fingernails, rattling the brass hardware of her purse. I understood the situation then. They were not just here out of greed. They were here out of survival. Something had gone wrong in their carefully curated lives. They were hemorrhaging cash, and my face on the evening news looked like a lifeboat to a drowning couple. The threat to freeze the assets was a bluff, designed to force a rapid cash settlement. They needed money immediately, and they were willing to destroy me a second time to get it. I looked away from Helen's shaking hands and met Gregory's gaze. "File the injunction," I said evenly. "I look forward to discussing your forgery under oath during the discovery phase of the trial." Gregory stopped pacing, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching in his cheek. He grabbed Helen by the elbow, pulling her out of the chair with rough urgency. "You always were a selfish, ungrateful child," he spat. "We will see you in court. Do not try to move a single dollar." They marched back to their silver sedan. The tires spun on the gravel as Gregory threw the car into reverse and sped out of my neighborhood. I sat alone in the morning quiet. I picked up their untouched coffee mugs and carried them into the kitchen. Before the hot water even hit the ceramic in the sink, my phone vibrated against the granite countertop. The caller ID displayed the name of a second cousin I had not spoken to since middle school. I let it go to voicemail. 2 seconds later, a text message arrived from an aunt who had ignored me at my own high school graduation. The message read that she saw the news, she was so proud of me, and she had a great investment idea we needed to discuss over lunch. The phone vibrated again. Then a third time. The screen lit up with a relentless stream of notifications. Gregory had not just left my property, he had activated the network. He was broadcasting my lottery win to every distant relative, every estranged family friend, and every acquaintance in his contact list. He was framing himself as the wronged patriarch being cut out by a greedy daughter, signaling to the entire bloodline that the vault was open and they should stake their claims. The notifications bled together into a continuous dull hum against the stone counter. My private life was officially over. The siege had begun. I realized Gregory's threat to freeze my assets was a real legal maneuver, and it was going to hit me before the state lottery office even processed my winner documentation. Distant relatives were sending me messages asking for loans to fix their roofs, pay off their cars, and fund their startup businesses. The entitlement poured through the screen in real time. I did not sleep well that night. The quiet inside my house felt heavy and charged with the anticipation of a coming storm. The relentless buzzing of my phone had finally stopped after I muted the notifications, but the silence only amplified the tension. Gregory and Helen were the blunt instruments of our family dynamic. They relied on volume, authority, and intimidation to get what they wanted. I knew their failure on my patio would not end the siege. It would merely trigger a change in tactics. At 8 the next morning, the doorbell chimed. I knew before looking through the security peephole who would be standing on the porch. My older brother Nolan stood on my welcome mat. He was the golden child, the protected son who never faced a single consequence for his actions. 15 years ago, Nolan drove a stolen sedan through the front glass of a local pharmacy. He was intoxicated, terrified, and staring down a felony conviction that would ruin his pending college scholarship. My parents decided his future was worth more than mine. I was instructed to tell the police I was the one driving the vehicle. When I refused to take the fall for a crime I did not commit, they discarded me to protect him. Nolan never looked back, never apologized, and went on to live a shielded life funded by their endless financial bailouts. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Nolan did not lead with anger like our father had. He led with a carefully constructed portrait of devastation. His shoulders were slumped, his posture defeated. His eyes were red and brimming with tears that threatened to spill over his cheeks. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the world, a man who had nowhere else to turn. He asked in a broken whisper if he could come inside. I stepped back and let him enter the living room. He sank onto my sofa and buried his face in his hands, letting out a ragged, trembling sigh. He began his performance. He told me about his 7-year-old son, Liam. Nolan spun a tragic, elaborate narrative about a sudden illness, a rare neurological condition that local pediatricians could not diagnose or treat. He claimed Liam was deteriorating rapidly and needed a highly specialized experimental surgery down in a Miami research hospital. He stated the insurance company had denied the claim, leaving the cost at $400,000 out of pocket. He looked up at me, the tears now flowing freely. He said he was desperate as a father. He begged for an advance from my lottery winnings. He painted himself as a broken man willing to swallow his pride to save his child. If I gave him the money to secure the surgical date, he swore he would intervene with our parents. He promised to force Gregory and Helen to drop their hostile claims, assuring me he could make them leave me alone forever. It was a compelling pitch, combining emotional extortion with a tangible solution to my current nightmare. I appraise items for a living. As an estate liquidator, I walk into rooms filled with centuries of accumulated possessions and separate the authentic treasures from the cheap replicas. I am trained to look for the tiny inconsistencies that expose a fake. I applied that exact same professional scrutiny to my grieving brother. I noticed the faint, distinct orange line of a fresh spray tan along his shirt collar. Grieving fathers spending sleepless nights in hospital waiting rooms do not book appointments at luxury tanning salons. I watched his hands as he wiped away a tear. A heavy brushed steel watch slipped out from under his tailored shirt cuff. The thick sapphire crystal caught the morning light streaming through my window. It was a current year model of an exclusive luxury brand, a timepiece that retailed for more than most working families earn in a year. The clothes he wore were crisp, expensive, and perfectly fitted. Nothing about his physical presentation aligned with the story of a man facing financial ruin over mounting medical bills. I sat down in the armchair across from him. I kept my voice gentle, matching his fabricated sorrow, offering no hint of suspicion. I asked him for the name of the specialist down in Miami. I inquired about the specific neurological pathway the experimental procedure was targeting. I mentioned that in my estate liquidation work, I frequently dealt with high-level medical professionals and could easily reach out to a hospital liaison to help expedite Liam's consultation. Nolan froze. The tears stopped flowing instantly, as if a faucet had been turned off. He blinked his eyes, darting toward the front door, and then back to my face. He stammered out a generic doctor name, something that sounded like it was pulled directly from a daytime medical drama. He waved his hand dismissively, stating the medical terminology was far too complex for him to remember under so much stress. He urged me to stop asking questions and just write a promissory note so he could save his son. I kept my gaze locked on his face. I informed him that Liam was perfectly healthy. I pointed out the fresh spray tan rubbing off on his collar. I named the exact model, the brand, and the estimated retail value of the watch gleaming on his wrist. I told him he was a terrible actor and that his attempt to weaponize his own child for a cash grab was pathetic even for him. The sorrow vanished from Nolan's face. The charming, helpless brother disappeared, replaced by a cold, calculating stranger who realized he was cornered in a lie. His features crystallized into sharp fury. He stood up, towering over my coffee table, dropping the facade entirely. He did not raise his fists, but his voice turned venomous. He told me I had just made a terrible mistake. He stated he was the primary witness to the family syndicate Gregory had mentioned yesterday. He claimed he had emails, digital records, and personal notes detailing our shared lottery pool. He told me he would sign sworn affidavits backing our parents up in a court of law. He promised to testify that I had stolen the winning ticket from the family fund. He stepped closer, ensuring I heard every syllable of his threat. He vowed to tie my $45 million up in probate litigation for a decade. He promised to make sure the ensuing legal fees drained every cent I had in my personal savings before the state ever released the lump sum payout. He leaned down, staring into my eyes, and told me I would end up back on the street, sleeping on a bus station bench, exactly like I did at 19. He turned on his heel and walked out, slamming the front door behind him with enough force to rattle the windows. The threat was not a bluff. My family was coordinating a full-scale assault on my assets, using the legal system to choke me out before I could even claim my prize. They knew I did not have the upfront capital to sustain a prolonged legal war, and they intended to starve me into submission. I needed a distraction. I needed to focus on something I could control, something grounded in logic rather than betrayal. I grabbed my car keys and drove toward my liquidation warehouse. I planned to lose myself in cataloging a recent estate, finding comfort in the quiet history of antique furniture and forgotten art. I needed the sanctuary of my work to steady my mind before contacting an attorney. I unlocked the front door of my warehouse, expecting the familiar, comforting scent of old wood and polished silver. Instead, I found Sterling, my employer of 4 years, standing beside my desk. He wore a fitted gray suit that cost more than my monthly salary. He held a thick manila folder in his hands. He did not look up from the paperwork right away. The smug, calculating grin on his face signaled that the nightmare of my morning was expanding onto a new front. Sterling owned the liquidation firm. He built his wealth by paying pennies on the dollar for grieving families' heirlooms. I did the heavy lifting. I did the appraising, the sorting, the negotiating. He signed the paychecks and took the credit. "Good morning," Darius Sterling said. He tossed the folder onto my desk. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud against the wood. I did not take off my coat. I looked at the folder, then at him, keeping my expression entirely neutral. "I saw the local news broadcast," he said. He leaned against the edge of my desk, crossing his arms over his chest. He outlined his morning routine. He had watched the leaked convenience store security footage. He paid close attention to the timestamp ticking in the bottom corner of the broadcast. 12:14 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. We were handling the corporate cleanout for the Henderson estate that day. Sterling continued, "You were on the clock. You ran out to grab lunch at the exact time that ticket was purchased." He tapped the manila folder with his index finger. Inside were drafted legal documents, an injunction, a civil suit, a settlement agreement. He wove a narrative just as expertly as my father had on my patio. Sterling claimed that while sorting the Henderson estate, I discovered a lockbox containing petty cash belonging to the client. He accused me of pocketing that cash and using it to purchase the winning lottery ticket during my lunch break. According to the strict employment contract I signed 4 years ago, any assets acquired using company funds, client money, or materials found on a job site legally belong to the limited liability company. He was staking a formal corporate claim on my ticket. "It is corporate embezzlement," Daria Sterling said. His tone was light conversational, treating my impending ruin like a simple business transaction. "If I call the police, you face felony theft charges. The State Lottery Commission will seize the ticket as evidence in a criminal investigation. You will sit in a holding cell while the state decides what to do with the funds." He slid an expensive ballpoint pen across my desk. It rolled and stopped against my keyboard. "Or," he said, "you sign the settlement agreement inside that folder. We divide the winnings. The company retains 60%. You keep 40% as a discretionary bonus. I will draft a non-disclosure agreement, and we pretend the petty cash incident never happened." I stood perfectly still. The warehouse around me smelled of polished mahogany and old paper. For 4 years, I had organized this space. I knew every item on every shelf. I knew the history and value of every discarded object. Sterling thought he had cornered me. He assumed the dual threat of criminal charges and a civil lawsuit would shatter my resolve. He expected me to panic, to cry, to reach for the pen to save myself from a prison sentence. I looked past his shoulder. My eyes scanned the tall metal storage cages at the back of the facility. The cages held items awaiting final auction, mostly high-value pieces sequestered from the main floor. I noticed a vintage tea service sitting on the second shelf. It was authentic, crafted in the late 19th century with intricate floral motifs. I had personally appraised that exact tea service 3 months ago during the liquidation of a historic estate. I had logged it on the client inventory manifest with a high auction estimate. A week later, Sterling informed me the silver was tarnished beyond repair and had been sold to a scrap metal dealer. The grieving family received a tiny fraction of its true value. Yet the tea service sat in his private lockup right now, gleaming under the fluorescent lights, perfectly intact and ready for an off-book sale. I shifted my gaze to a lower wire bin. I spotted a neat stack of rare, first-edition hardcover novels. I had carefully cataloged those books during a library estate sale in early spring, wearing white cotton gloves to preserve the fragile dust jackets. Sterling claimed a pipe burst in the holding area, resulting in severe water damage. He had the books struck from the final accounting ledger as a total loss. But looking at them now, I saw pristine spines and crisp corners. My mind rapidly connected the dots, building a clear picture of his business model. Sterling was not a brilliant negotiator. He was a white-collar thief. He had been skimming premium items off the top of his own clients' estates for years. He hid the best inventory in the back cages, falsified the ledgers, lied to grieving families, and sold the stolen goods through private, untraceable auctions. I did not point at the silver. I did not mention the books. I simply reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and opened a blank text document. "What are you doing?" Sterling asked. His smug grin faltered, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. I kept my eyes on the cages. I typed the serial numbers of the items I recognized. I documented the dates of the original estate sales from memory. I built a silent, damning ledger of his systemic fraud right in front of him. "I'm taking inventory," I replied. My voice was steady and cold. I put my phone back into my pocket. I stepped around him and picked up an empty cardboard box from the supply corner. I walked back to my desk. I bypassed his legal folder and the rolling pen. I opened my top drawer. I placed my brass appraisal loop into the cardboard box. I packed a framed photograph of my rescue dog. I took my personal reference books. I moved with slow, methodical precision. Sterling watched me clear my workspace. The silence in the warehouse grew thick and dangerous. He realized I was not going to negotiate. "If you walk out that door, you are fired," Sterling warned. His voice lost its conversational lightness. It turned hard and sharp. "I will file the injunction before you reach your car. I will call the police." I picked up my cardboard box. It was light, holding only the few things I truly owned in this building. I looked him directly in the eye, channeling every ounce of discipline I had developed over 15 years of self-reliance. "File the injunction, Sterling," I said. "Make sure your corporate ledgers are perfectly balanced. Make sure you are ready for a forensic audit during the discovery phase. When you sue me for corporate theft, a judge will want to review every single estate sale we have processed over the last 4 years to establish a baseline of missing funds. I wonder what the auditors will think about the 19th century silver tea service on your second shelf. I wonder what they will say about the pristine first edition novels you reported destroyed by water damage." The color drained from Sterling's face. The threat of a forensic audit hit the exact nerve I intended to strike. His posture crumbled. He knew his fraudulent books would not survive basic legal scrutiny. He knew his secret lockup would expose a pattern of grand theft far exceeding the imaginary petty cash he accused me of taking. He realized he had invited a predator into his glass house. I did not wait for his response. I turned my back on him and walked toward the exit. "You are terminated," he shouted, his voice echoing off the high tin ceiling. "You hear me? You are done in this industry. I will bury you in court." I pushed through the heavy front doors and stepped out into the blinding Florida sun. The heat radiated off the asphalt parking lot in shimmering waves. I placed my box in the trunk of my car and closed the lid. I leaned against the bumper and exhaled. I was officially unemployed. I was fighting a two-front war against my own bloodline and my former employer. The people who were supposed to protect and mentor me had instead synchronized their attacks to strip me of everything I owned. I felt the claustrophobia setting in. The walls were closing rapidly. I had outsmarted them in the immediate moments using their own corruption as a shield, but the legal machinery was already in motion. Gregory had his fraudulent loan and his fake family syndicate. Sterling had his fabricated corporate embezzlement claim. They did not need to win in court. They only needed to file the paperwork to freeze my life. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. The air conditioning kicked on, but it did not chase away the cold dread settling in my stomach. I reached for my phone to call an attorney, hoping to secure representation and stay ahead of the filings. Before I could dial a number, the screen illuminated with an incoming call. The caller ID displayed the name of the assisted living facility where my elderly Aunt Clara resided. She was the only relative who had ever shown me an ounce of kindness, the only person who offered me a couch when my parents changed the locks 15 years ago. I swiped to answer, expecting a routine update from the nursing staff. Instead, the facility director's voice came through the speaker, tight with professional regret. She informed me that Aunt Clara's account was dangerously delinquent, and if payment was not rendered by the end of the business day, they would begin the eviction process. My heart hammered against my ribs. I kept the director on the line and opened my mobile banking application to transfer the funds from my personal savings. The screen loaded, displaying my account balances. A bright red banner stretched across the top of my phone screen. Both my checking and savings accounts were locked. The available balance read 0. The legal chokehold had officially snapped shut. "I need you to grant me a 24-hour grace period." I spoke the words into the phone while staring at the locked banking application on my screen. My voice remained level, betraying none of the cold dread pooling in my chest. I stood in the sweltering asphalt parking lot outside my former workplace, the Florida sun beating down on the roof of my car. The facility director on the other end of the line hesitated. She liked my Aunt Clara, Everyone at the Coastal Care Center adored her, but Compassion did not keep the lights on or pay the nursing staff. The director cleared her throat, the sound sharp through the receiver, and agreed to hold off the eviction notice until tomorrow afternoon. She warned me that corporate policy required a full ledger clearance by then, or they would have no choice but to pack Clara's belongings. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. My hands gripped the steering wheel. The leather felt scalding against my palms. Gregory and Sterling had coordinated their strikes with terrifying efficiency. They did not just file claims against the lottery ticket. They weaponized the legal system to trigger an automatic security lock on my existing financial accounts. By crying fraud and corporate theft simultaneously, they flagged my Social Security number across the banking grid. My modest personal savings, my checking account, and the emergency fund I used to keep a roof over Clara's head were all inaccessible. I put the car in drive and navigated away from the liquidation warehouse. I did not head home. I drove straight toward a faded brick building in the industrial district. I needed a defense attorney. I did not need a corporate litigator who played golf with judges. I needed a fighter. Maya fit that description perfectly. I had met her 2 years ago during a highly contentious estate liquidation where she dismantled a greedy set of heirs with surgical precision. She operated out of a converted warehouse space, wore sharp linen suits, and spoke entirely in facts. Maya sat behind a steel desk reviewing the digital filings I forwarded to her paralegal on my drive over. She did not offer me coffee or false reassurances. She read the injunctions with a hard, unblinking stare. Sterling moved faster than I anticipated, Maya said. She turned her laptop screen toward me. She pointed to the digital signature at the bottom of the temporary restraining order. The order froze the payout of the $45 million. The State Lottery Commission placed the funds into a neutral escrow account, pending an official investigation into the ownership dispute. Look at the judge who signed the ex parte motion, Maya instructed. I read the name, Judge Thomas Caldwell. The name clicked into place, matching a high-end estate appraisal I had conducted a year prior. Sterling plays 18 holes with Caldwell every other Sunday at the Pelican Bay Club. I said. Maya nodded. It is a classic good old boy network maneuver. Sterling called in a favor to fast-track the injunction before you could secure representation. Your father compounded the issue by filing his forged loan claim on the exact same morning. The dual filings created enough smoke for Caldwell to declare a fire. The bank algorithm saw the pending litigation and locked your personal accounts to prevent capital flight. She leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. They are initiating a starvation tactic, Daria. They know you do not possess the upfront capital to sustain a prolonged legal war. They want to bleed you dry. They expect the financial pressure to break your resolve, forcing you to accept a lowball settlement just to keep the lights on. I need you to break the freeze on my checking account, I replied. My Aunt Clara needs her facility payment by tomorrow afternoon. Maya picked up a legal pad. I can file an emergency counter motion to unfreeze your personal assets, citing elder care necessities, and proving those funds predate the lottery win. But the filing fees, the paralegal hours, and my retainer must be cleared today to initiate the paperwork. She named a figure. It was a steep, uncompromising number. It represented the exact cost of survival in a system designed to crush the underfunded. I pulled out my wallet. I retrieved the only credit card I possessed that was not linked to the frozen banking institution. It was a high-interest emergency card with a modest limit. I handed it across the desk. Run it, I said. Maya processed the payment. The transaction was approved, leaving exactly $312 of available credit to my name. I was officially broke. I drove back to my house as the afternoon heat broke into a heavy, humid dusk. The neighborhood was quiet, blissfully ignorant of the warfare taking place inside my life. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the dim hallway. My home felt different now. It was no longer a sanctuary. It felt like a bunker. I walked into the kitchen and opened the pantry. The shelves were sparse. I had planned to go grocery shopping after my shift at the warehouse, a plan erased by Sterling's betrayal. I reached past a box of stale crackers and grabbed a square package of discount ramen noodles. It was the kind of meal I lived on 15 years ago, back when my parents changed the locks and left me to the streets. I filled a small metal pot with tap water and set it on the stove. I watched the water form tiny bubbles against the steel, waiting for it to boil. 15 years ago, I spent 3 weeks sleeping on a concrete bus station bench. I washed my face in public restrooms. I learned to ignore the sharp, hollow ache of an empty stomach. I was 19, terrified, and completely alone. Then an old station wagon pulled up to the curb. Aunt Clara stepped out. She did not ask about the stolen car. She did not ask about Nolan. She simply opened her passenger door and told me to get inside. She gave me the pull-out couch in her tiny apartment and fed me warm meals until I found a job waiting tables. Clara was 82 now. Her memory was fading, slipping away into a fog she could not control. I moved her into the Coastal Care Center 3 years ago, promising I would always protect her. I intended to keep that promise. I would burn my own life down to the foundations before I let Gregory's greed touch the woman who saved me. The water reached a rolling boil. I dropped the dried noodles into the pot. I carried my laptop to the kitchen island and opened it. I logged into my banking portal. I navigated past the bright red security banners and pulled up my primary statement. I stood in the quiet kitchen, eating cheap noodles from a chipped ceramic bowl, and stared at the screen. The visual contrast was a masterpiece of cruel irony. At the top of the ledger, a pending deposit sat in bold green text, $45 million. Directly below it, my available liquid balance displayed in stark black numbers, $312.40. I was the wealthiest woman in the county, yet I was eating a 50-cent meal, rationing my electricity, and relying on a maxed-out credit card to keep my elderly aunt from being thrown onto the street. Gregory, Helen, and Sterling were sitting in their comfortable, air-conditioned homes right now. They were drinking expensive wine, patting themselves on the back. They believed they had won. They thought the threat of poverty would trigger my childhood trauma. They assumed the ghost of the terrified 19-year-old girl they discarded would rise up, beg for mercy, and sign over the fortune. They failed to understand a fundamental truth. Starvation is a terrifying prospect to people who have never been hungry. To someone who has survived the bottom, it is just a familiar landscape. I finished the broth. I washed the bowl in the sink and dried it with a cotton towel. My mind was clear-focused and humming with cold precision. The panic had burned away, leaving behind a sharp, tactical focus. I was not going to crawl to the negotiation table. I was going to let them overplay their hand. I was going to let their arrogance blind them to the trap Maya and I were building. I closed the laptop and turned off the kitchen lights. As I walked toward the hallway, my phone vibrated against the dark counter. The screen illuminated the shadows. I walked back and picked it up. It was a text message from an unregistered burner number. I opened the message. The text consisted of a single, desperate sentence, followed by an address to a 24-hour beachfront diner located 3 towns over. "I need to meet you tonight," the message read. "I can prove Dad forged the emails, but you have to pay me. Nolan." I stared at the glowing screen. The siege was cracking. The united front my family projected was already failing under the weight of their own self-interest. The golden child was preparing a double cross, stepping out of the shadows to sell out his own blood for a piece of the prize. I drove south along the coastal highway, keeping the speedometer exactly at the legal limit. The ocean stretched out to my left, hidden by the pitch-black night. The 24-hour diner sat at the edge of the county line, glowing under a flickering neon sign that buzzed like an angry wasp. The parking lot was nearly empty. A single luxury SUV sat under the glow of a sodium street lamp. Nolan had always preferred driving vehicles he could not afford. I parked my older sedan 2 spaces away. Before unbuckling my seatbelt, I opened the voice memo application on my phone. I pressed the red circular button and locked the screen. I walked through the heavy glass doors, holding the device casually in my left hand. The diner smelled of stale coffee and industrial frying oil. Nolan occupied a corner booth in the far back facing the entrance. He wore a dark designer jacket over a crisp white shirt, looking entirely out of place against the peeling vinyl upholstery. He raised a hand when he saw me. I slid into the booth opposite him. I placed my phone face down on the sticky Formica table, right in the center between the salt shaker and the napkin dispenser. The microphone pointed directly at his chest. "You look exhausted, Daria," he said. His voice carried a faux sympathetic tone. He signaled the tired waitress and ordered a steak and eggs breakfast plate for himself. I asked for a plain iced tea. "The legal freeze is doing its job," he continued, folding his hands on the table. "Dad told me the banks locked you out of your personal checking. You cannot pay Maya. You cannot pay for Aunt Clara. You are backed into a corner with zero leverage." I did not confirm or deny his assessment. I waited. Nolan hated silence. As a child, whenever he broke a neighbor's window or stole cash from our mother's purse, he would always fill the quiet with elaborate stories, trying to talk his way out of the inevitable punishment. He possessed a desperate need to control the narrative. "I am not here to gloat," Nolan said, leaning forward. "I am here to offer you a way out. Dad and Helen are greedy. They want half. Sterling wants 60%. They are going to bleed you in probate court until you default on your legal fees." The waitress arrived carrying a tall glass of iced tea and placed it in front of me. She set a heavy ceramic plate of food down for Nolan. He did not thank her. He waited until she retreated behind the counter before reaching into his jacket pocket. He produced a folded legal document and slid it across the table. It stopped next to my hidden recording device. "I have retained my own counsel," he said, slicing into his meal. "That is a binding non-disclosure and consulting agreement. You sign it and guarantee me a flat fee of $5 million the moment the state unfreezes your lottery payout. In exchange, I walk away from Dad's lawsuit. I will sit for a sworn deposition with your lawyer. I will testify that Dad is committing perjury, and I will provide the digital proof to destroy Sterling's corporate claim." I picked up the tall glass. Condensation beaded against the cold surface. I stirred the iced tea with a long metal spoon, letting the ice cubes clink softly against the glass. "You expect me to pay you $5 million to tell the truth?" I asked, keeping my tone flat and inquisitive. "I expect you to pay me for the key to your cage," he replied, chewing his food. $5 million is a bargain, Daria. You walk away with $40 million. Everyone wins." "What exactly are you bringing to the table, Nolan?" I asked, taking a slow sip. "My attorney needs facts, not vague promises. If I am buying evidence, I need to know the quality of the merchandise." Nolan smiled a self-satisfied smirk. He believed he held all the cards. He thought my questioning meant I was evaluating the deal, preparing to capitulate. His arrogance overrode his caution. "Dad does not have a family syndicate," Nolan said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He made the whole thing up the morning after your face hit the local news. He went into the garage and booted up the old desktop computer we used in high school. He changed the internal clock and date settings on the operating system. Then he typed out an entire thread of fake emails detailing a shared lottery pool. He sent them back and forth between his account and Helen's account to create a digital paper trail." He took another bite of his steak, pointing his fork at me. I watched him do it. Nolan continued, "I was standing right there in the garage. I have photographs of the computer screen showing the manipulated timestamps. I also have the metadata proving the files were created 3 days ago, not 5 years ago. Once Maya submits that to the judge, Dad's entire lawsuit evaporates. He will be facing felony perjury and fraud charges. The judge will lift the freeze on your assets that same afternoon." I stirred my iced tea again. The metal spoon scraped the bottom of the glass. Nolan had just handed me a golden ticket. He confessed to witnessing a felony and conspiring to use that felony to extort me for $5 million. He implicated our father in wire fraud perjury and the fabrication of digital evidence. Every single word was currently saving onto the solid-state drive of my phone. "What about Sterling?" I asked. "Sterling is an idiot," Nolan scoffed. "I know the manager at the convenience store where you bought the ticket. I already paid him $1,000 to hand over the raw security footage from that Tuesday. The footage clearly shows you swiping your personal bank debit card at the register. You did not use cash. Sterling's claim about company petty cash is a complete fabrication. I will hand over the flash drive with the video the second you sign my consulting agreement. Nolan wiped his mouth with a paper napkin and leaned back against the vinyl booth. He looked incredibly pleased with himself. He had played both sides perfectly in his own mind. He was willing to send our parents to prison and destroy my boss just to line his own pockets without doing a single day of honest work. I looked at the contract sitting on the table. It was printed on thick, expensive paper. I reached out and pushed it back across the Formica surface toward him. "I appreciate the detailed presentation, Nolan," I said, "but I am going to decline your offer." Nolan frowned. The smug satisfaction vanished from his features, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. He stared at the rejected contract and then looked up at me. "Are you stupid?" he asked, his voice rising slightly. "I am offering you the only exit. You do not have the money to fight them, Daria. They are going to ruin you." I picked up my glass and took one final sip of the iced tea. I placed it down with a soft thud. "I do not negotiate with terrorists," I replied. Nolan stared at me, his face flushing with sudden heat. He grabbed the contract and shoved it back into his jacket pocket. He threw a $20 bill onto the table to cover his meal. "You are going to regret this," he snarled, leaning over the table. "You are going to lose everything because you are too stubborn to pay a toll. When the bank forecloses on your house and they throw Aunt Clara out onto the street, you will remember this conversation. I am going to call Dad right now and tell him I am signing the affidavit to back his fake emails. I am going to bury you." He turned and stormed out of the diner, the heavy glass doors swinging wildly in his wake. I remained in the booth. I listened to the engine of his luxury SUV roar to life in the parking lot and fade into the distance. The diner returned to its quiet, low hum. The waitress emerged from behind the counter to collect his empty plate and the cash. She did not look at me. I reached out and picked up my phone. I unlocked the screen. The red recording timer displayed 24 minutes and 12 seconds. I tapped the square stop button. I saved the audio file to a secure cloud server and forwarded a direct copy to Maya's encrypted legal portal. Nolan believed he had left me with nothing but a looming defeat. He walked out into the Florida night, convinced I would break under the financial pressure and come crawling back to his terms. He lacked the basic self-awareness to realize his own greed had just provided the exact ammunition my defense attorney needed to dismantle their entire legal strategy from the inside out. I left a $5 tip on the table and walked out to my car. The coastal air felt cool and sharp against my face. The claustrophobia that had plagued me all afternoon was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating calm. I had the proof of the forgery. I had the evidence of the extortion. The pieces of my trap were falling into place. I drove back up the highway toward my house. The digital clock on my dashboard read 2 a.m. I turned onto my quiet suburban street and pulled into my driveway. The headlights swept across the front of my property, illuminating the manicured lawn and the dark windows. I shifted the car into park and cut the engine. As the headlights clicked off, my eyes adjusted to the shadows covering my front porch. Someone was sitting on the top step of my porch. I did not panic. I kept my hand near the heavy metal flashlight tucked into the side compartment of my driver's side door. I stepped out of the vehicle and walked slowly up the paved walkway, my footsteps crunching softly against the gravel. The figure on the steps shifted, pulling a thin cardigan tighter around her shoulders. She looked up as I approached. The glow of a distant street lamp caught her face. It was Sarah, Nolan's wife. She looked exhausted, her eyes red and swollen, her hands clutching a small leather bag tightly against her chest. She had not come to deliver threats or demand a cut of the money. She looked like a woman who had been running for a very long time and had finally run out of road. I stepped aside and held the front door open, allowing the cool coastal breeze to sweep into the foyer. Sarah crossed the threshold, carrying the scent of damp night air and sheer panic. She moved with a stiff, hesitant gait, like a bird with a clipped wing. I guided her into the kitchen and pulled out a bar stool at the island. She climbed onto the seat, wrapping her arms around her torso to stop the shivering. I filled the glass with water and set it in front of her. The kitchen pendant lights cast a bright, unforgiving glow across her features. I had not seen my sister-in-law up close in several years. Nolan always controlled their social calendar, keeping her isolated behind the gated walls of their suburban subdivision. He paraded her out for holiday photographs and corporate dinners, presenting the illusion of a flawless American family. The woman sitting in my kitchen shattered that illusion entirely. She looked a decade older than her 32 years. Dark circles bruised the delicate skin under her eyes. Her hair hung in limp, unwashed strands. I looked down at her feet and experienced a sharp, visceral jolt of recognition. She wore cheap canvas flats. The soles were peeling away from the fabric, and the canvas was frayed at the edges. Earlier tonight, Nolan sat across from me wearing a heavy brushed steel luxury watch and a tailored designer jacket. He projected wealth and effortless success. Sarah wore the unmistakable uniform of financial neglect. I recognized the scuffed shoes and the hollow, fearful exhaustion radiating from her posture. It was the exact same terror I carried in my bones 15 years ago when I slept on a concrete bus station bench. "He is going to get us killed," Sarah whispered. Her voice cracked dry and brittle. She picked up the water glass with both hands. The water trembled inside the rim. She took a slow sip and closed her eyes. "Nolan came to see me this morning," I said, keeping my tone level to anchor her racing mind. "He told me Liam was sick. He asked for $400,000 for an experimental surgery down in Miami." Sarah let out a bitter, hollow sound that was not quite a laugh. She opened her eyes. The fear in them shifted into sharp, crystalline anger. "Liam is perfectly fine," she replied. "He is asleep in his bed right now, oblivious to the fact that his father is drowning us." "Nolan does not need medical money, Daria. He owes $200,000 to an illegal sports betting ring operating out of a warehouse in Miami. He has been gambling our mortgage payments, our savings, and Liam's college fund for the past 3 years. He lost everything." I leaned against the granite counter, processing the confession. The pieces of Nolan's frantic behavior clicked into a coherent, terrifying picture. The tears he shed in my living room were authentic, but they were not rooted in a father's grief. They were the tears of a desperate, cornered addict facing a violent collection agency. 2 days ago, a black town car parked at the end of our driveway, Sarah continued. Her knuckles turned white around the glass. A man in a suit walked up to my front door while Nolan was at work. He handed me an envelope. Inside were photographs of Liam walking into his elementary school. The man told me Nolan had until the end of the month to clear his ledger. If the debt remained unpaid, they were going to collect their collateral. A cold chill settled in my stomach. The extortion attempt at the diner made perfect sense now. Nolan was running out of time. He needed my lottery payout to cover his gambling debts and buy his way out of a lethal situation. When I refused to sign his consulting agreement, I inadvertently cut his only lifeline. Sarah reached into her worn leather bag. Her fingers fumbled past a ring of keys and a child's plastic toy. She withdrew a small silver flash drive and placed it on the counter between us. The metal casing clicked against the stone surface. "I knew he was planning to blackmail you," Sarah said. "He bragged about it to me in the kitchen. He thought he was a genius. He watched Gregory fabricate those family syndicate emails on the old desktop computer in the garage. Gregory typed them out and changed the system clock to make them look years old. When Gregory left to go file the lawsuit, Nolan sneaked back into the garage and copied the metadata." She tapped her index finger against the flash drive. "Nolan kept the files on his laptop," she explained. "He planned to sell them to you for $5 million. He left the laptop unlocked on the kitchen counter while he took a shower to get ready for his meeting with you tonight. I copied the entire directory. Everything is on that drive. The original timestamps, the registry logs, the fake email drafts, and an audio recording of Nolan calling his bookie, promising a massive payout from your lottery ticket." I stared at the small silver device. It was the ultimate legal weapon. It held the digital forensic evidence required to dismantle Gregory's fraudulent lawsuit and send him to prison for perjury. It proved my father and my brother engaged in a coordinated conspiracy to extort my assets. "Why are you giving this to me?" I asked. I studied her face, searching for any trace of the deception that ran through my bloodline. "You know this evidence will put your husband behind bars. He ceased being my husband the day he put a price tag on our son," Sarah answered without a second of hesitation. "I do not want your lottery ticket, Daria. I do not care about the money. I just want to survive. If Nolan finds out I took these files, he will hurt me. If the Miami bookies do not get paid, they will hurt Liam. I am trapped." She pushed the flash drive closer to my hand. "Take the evidence," she pleaded. "Give it to your lawyer. Destroy their lawsuit. In exchange, I only ask for one thing. When the state unfreezes your funds, I need enough cash to pack my car and drive far away. I need enough to hire a divorce attorney and disappear before Nolan or his creditors figure out where I went. Protect us, Daria, please." I looked at the worn canvas shoes on her feet. 15 years ago, Gregory and Helen sacrificed my future to save Nolan from his own criminal choices. They threw me to the wolves. They demanded I suffer so their golden boy could thrive. Nolan had spent his entire adult life insulated from consequence, shielded by my parents' unwavering loyalty. Now his own wife sat in my kitchen, begging me to shield her from him. I picked up the flash drive. The metal felt cold and heavy in my palm. I slipped it into the front pocket of my jeans, securing the tool that would end the legal war. "You have my word," I told her. "I will cover your relocation expenses. I will retain the best family law attorney in the state to handle your divorce and secure full custody of Liam. You will never have to worry about Nolan or his debts again. But you need to return to that house tonight and pretend everything is normal. Do not pack a single bag until I give you the signal." Sarah let out a long, trembling exhale. The rigid tension in her shoulders collapsed. A few tears spilled over her eyelashes, tracing tracks through the exhausted shadows on her face. She nodded, standing up from the bar stool. For the first time all evening, a faint spark of hope replaced the terror in her eyes. I walked her back to the front door and watched her drive away into the dark. I locked the deadbolt and leaned against the wood. The conflict had shifted dimensions. I was no longer fighting a simple battle for a piece of paper worth $45 million. I was fighting to dismantle a toxic, corrupt foundation that had poisoned everyone it touched. I held the power to save an innocent child and free a desperate woman from the exact same cage I escaped a decade and a half ago. I walked into my home office and booted up my computer. I drafted a secure, encrypted email to Maya attaching the compressed files from the flash drive. The evidence was irrefutable. We possessed the ammunition to destroy Gregory's civil suit before the judge even reviewed the initial discovery motions. I went to sleep for a few hours, finding genuine rest for the first time since my face appeared on the television screen. I woke up with the sun, feeling a profound sense of tactical advantage. We had them checkmated. But as I poured my morning coffee, my phone vibrated on the counter. It was a message from Maya containing an audio link. I tapped the screen. A loud, booming voice filled my kitchen, introducing a popular local true crime and drama podcast. The host promised an exclusive, explosive interview regarding the stolen lottery ticket currently tearing a prominent Florida family apart. The guest speaker was introduced. Helen's voice crackled through the phone speaker, thick with performative grief. They had failed to break me in private. They were now taking the war into the public square, determined to burn my reputation to ash. The host of the podcast possessed a deep, resonant baritone designed specifically to manufacture suspense. His show catered to the true crime demographic that thrived on local scandals and neighborhood betrayals. He introduced the episode as a heartbreaking look into the dark side of sudden wealth. Then he yielded the floor to my mother. Helen played her part flawlessly. Her voice trembled at the precise moments required to elicit maximum sympathy. She spun a fabricated tragedy about a wayward daughter who had always taken advantage of her generous parents. According to the narrative she broadcasted across the digital airwaves, Gregory and Helen had recently entrusted me with their collective retirement savings. She claimed I was supposed to deposit those funds into a secure, high-yield investment account to secure their twilight years. Instead, she wept into the studio microphone, claiming I used their life savings to purchase lottery tickets and then selfishly hoarded the $45 million jackpot for myself. During my childhood, my mother participated in amateur community theater. She spent years auditioning for leading roles in local productions, but the directors always relegated her to the ensemble. She craved the spotlight with a desperate hunger. Today, she finally secured her starring role. She modulated her breathing, letting a calculated sob hitch in her throat before describing the imaginary heartbreak of watching her own flesh and blood steal her future. Gregory chimed in a few minutes later, playing the role of the stoic, betrayed patriarch. He spoke in low, measured tones, detailing how much it pained him to take legal action against his own child. He painted their fraudulent lawsuit not as an act of greed, but as a desperate final measure to reclaim their stolen retirement nest egg. The host ate up every single syllable, expressing outrage on their behalf and directing his listeners to share the episode far and wide. The audio file spread across coastal Florida like a brush fire. The regional social media groups picked it up, linking the broadcast to the leaked convenience store security footage. By the following afternoon, the episode had accumulated hundreds of thousands of downloads. The digital mob formed instantly. The comment sections overflowed with venom directed at my character. People who had never met me called for my arrest, demanding the state confiscate the winning ticket and return the funds to my poor, destitute parents. The digital outrage did not remain confined to the internet. It bled into my physical reality almost immediately. I needed fresh produce and simple household supplies. I drove to the local supermarket wearing dark sunglasses and a plain gray hooded sweatshirt, hoping to blend into the evening crowd. I navigated the fluorescent aisles with my head down. As I reached the checkout lane, a woman holding a plastic basket stopped dead in her tracks. She stared at my face, matching my features to the viral thumbnail image circulating online. Her eyes narrowed into slits of pure disgust. She leaned over to the man standing next to her, whispering harshly while pointing a manicured finger in my direction. The whispers rippled down the checkout line. The cashier, a young man who usually greeted me with a polite nod, refused to make eye contact. He scanned my items with sharp, rigid movements. When the receipt printed, he did not hand it to me. He dropped it onto the moving black belt, letting it flutter toward my groceries. I bagged my own items and walked out of the sliding glass doors feeling the heavy, oppressive weight of public condemnation pressing against my spine. I had become a pariah in my own hometown. Gregory and Helen understood the power of social pressure. They intended to isolate me, turning my community into a hostile environment until the psychological strain forced me to surrender the money. The intimidation tactics escalated under the cover of darkness. The next morning, I stepped onto my front porch holding a mug of black coffee. The humid Florida heat hung thick in the air. I looked toward the end of my driveway and stopped. My older model sedan sat on flat rims. The front driver's side tire and the rear passenger tire were punctured, deeply slashed with a sharp blade. A heavy green liquor bottle lay shattered across the concrete driveway, sparkling dangerously in the morning sun. The jagged shards covered the path from my vehicle to the street, a clear physical warning from a stranger who had consumed my parents' lies and decided to enact vigilante justice. I did not retreat into my house. I did not call the local police department to file a useless vandalism report that would only generate more public spectacle. I walked back into my kitchen, set my coffee mug on the counter, and retrieved a wide-bristled broom and a metal dustpan from the utility closet. I walked out to the driveway. I placed a wireless earbud into my right ear. I opened the podcast application on my phone and pressed play on the viral episode. I swept the broken glass with slow, methodical strokes. The stiff bristles scratched against the warm concrete, gathering the green shards into a neat pile. As I worked, I listened to Helen's voice echoing in my ear. I did not focus on the emotional manipulation. I focused on the specific, actionable statements. She stated as a fact that I embezzled her retirement fund. She claimed I was currently under criminal investigation for elder abuse. She provided specific, fictional dollar amounts I allegedly drained from their bank accounts. My phone vibrated in my pocket, interrupting the broadcast. It was Maya. I tapped the earbud to accept the call. Maya sounded uncharacteristically furious. Her usual calm demeanor was gone, replaced by the sharp edge of a litigator watching her client being crucified in the public square. She told me she had just finished listening to the podcast. She informed me she was already drafting a cease and desist order to serve the podcast host and the production company. She wanted to file an emergency motion for a gag order to stop Gregory and Helen from poisoning the potential jury pool any further. She viewed the viral broadcast as a catastrophic public relations disaster that could sway the judge handling our upcoming hearings. I dumped the first dustpan of broken glass into a heavy trash bin. Do not send the cease and desist, I told her. Let the episodes stay online. Let them rack up another 500,000 downloads. Maya paused on the other end of the line. She asked me why I would willingly allow them to destroy my reputation and invite vandals to attack my property. Because they just handed us the rope, I explained, sweeping the remaining dust into a tight pile. Gregory and Helen are arrogant. They are so accustomed to controlling the family narrative without consequence that they forgot how the real world operates. They went onto a public recorded platform and broadcasted verifiable lies. They accused me of specific financial crimes that never happened. I paused, leaning against the wooden handle of the broom. That is not just a family dispute, Maya, I said. That is defamation per se. They quantified their damages in the public domain. They provided us with a pristine, recorded confession of slander. We do not need a gag order. We need to add a multi-million-dollar defamation claim to our countersuit. When this is over, they will owe me everything they have ever owned. Maya remained quiet for a long moment, processing the tactical shift. The anger drained from her voice, replaced by a low, appreciative hum. She realized the brilliance of the trap my parents had built for themselves. She agreed to hold off on the gag order and instructed me to document the vandalism for the upcoming damages assessment. I finished clearing the driveway and went back inside to wash the dust from my hands. The tire replacements would drain the very last of my emergency credit limit. I had just enough funds left to cover the facility payment for Aunt Clara, preventing her eviction for another 30 days. I called a mobile mechanic to patch the slashed rubber. The repairs took 2 hours. Once the tires held air, I climbed into the driver's seat and navigated toward the Coastal Care Center. I needed to see Clara. I needed to look at the only person who had ever protected me and remind myself exactly why I was enduring this siege. I pulled into the pristine landscaped parking lot of the assisted living facility. I walked through the sliding glass doors, preparing to hand my maxed-out credit card to the billing director. But as I approached the administrative desk, the facility director looked up at me with an expression of profound pity. She did not ask for my payment. Instead, she handed me a printed ledger that revealed a brand new, devastating financial betrayal. The target had shifted from me to the most vulnerable person I knew. Patricia tapped a manicured fingernail against the top page of the printout. She ran the Coastal Care Center billing department with strict efficiency, but her eyes held genuine sorrow. I reached across the reception desk and took the heavy stack of paper. The balance displayed at the bottom of the column did not represent a single missed deadline. It reflected a catastrophic half-year deficit. I assumed you were aware of the situation, Daria Patricia said, keeping her voice low to protect my privacy from passing nursing staff. Your father assured us he was resolving a minor routing error with the pension provider. We granted him multiple extensions because Clara has been a beloved resident here for years. But corporate headquarters initiated an automatic audit yesterday. They stripped my discretionary override power. I stared at the black ink on the white page. Clara received a monthly survival stipend from her late husband, who spent 4 decades working for the National Railway System. That steady, reliable income covered her room, her meals, and her specialized dementia care. According to the ledger, the deposits ceased arriving in the facility clearing account back in late November. Gregory holds the durable power of attorney, I murmured, tracing the dates with my index finger. Patricia nodded. He submitted the legal paperwork 5 years ago, right after her initial cognitive decline diagnosis. He controls her banking portfolio. We sent him the delinquency notices. He promised the arrears would be cleared by last Friday. When the deadline passed, he stopped answering our phone calls. I flipped to the second page of the document. The facility attached a copy of the most recent bank routing inquiry trying to locate the missing capital. The financial tracking codes told a clear, undeniable story. Gregory had not lost the pension. He had legally diverted the direct deposits into a private trust bearing his own name. From that private trust, he initiated recurring outbound wire transfers. I recognized the destination routing number instantly. It belonged to the high-priced, aggressive litigation firm located in downtown Tampa. It was the exact same legal outfit currently drafting the injunctions to steal my lottery ticket. The reality of the theft settled over me, dropping the temperature in the lobby by several degrees. Gregory was not just a greedy parent demanding a handout. He was a predator. He systematically drained the life support of his own elderly sister to finance his legal war against me. He knew Clara would face eviction. He knew a woman in advanced cognitive decline would not survive a transfer to an underfunded state-run ward. He considered her life an acceptable casualty in his pursuit of $45 million. I handed the printed ledger back to Patricia. I asked her to give me 10 minutes before processing any formal eviction paperwork. I needed to see my aunt. I walked down the quiet carpeted hallway toward the residential wing. The air smelled of sterile cleaners mixed with a faint trace of lavender. I stopped outside room 200 and pushed the heavy wooden door open. Clara sat in a floral-patterned armchair positioned by the window. She watched a pair of seagulls circling the blue coastal sky beyond the glass. She wore a soft knit cardigan draped over her thin shoulders. Her silver hair was brushed neatly, framing a face lined with decades of quiet resilience. I pulled a small wooden stool close to her chair and sat down. Clara turned her head. Her eyes, clouded by the fog of her illness, took a moment to focus on my face. When recognition finally sparked, a gentle, warm smile transformed her features. She reached out and took my hand. Her skin felt like translucent parchment paper stretched over fragile bird bones. Her grip was weak, trembling slightly against my palm. I looked down at our joined hands. 15 years ago, those same hands gripped the steering wheel of a beat-up station wagon, driving through a torrential thunderstorm to find me waiting at a bus terminal. Those hands carried blankets, folded clean clothes, and served warm soup while my parents pretended I no longer existed. Clara gave me shelter when the rest of the bloodline cast me into the cold. She patted my knuckles, humming a quiet melody she used to sing when I was a terrified teenager sleeping on her couch. She did not ask why I was visiting during the middle of the workday. She lived in a perpetual present tense, shielded from the cruelty of her brother's actions by the very disease slowly erasing her mind. I did not shed a tear. Crying offered no tactical advantage. Instead, a cold, dark precision settled deep within my chest, locking into place like a steel vault. I made a silent, ironclad vow, holding her fragile fingers. The battle had fundamentally shifted. Yesterday, I fought to defend a lottery ticket and secure my own financial independence. Today, the stakes involved survival. I was no longer interested in merely winning a civil dispute. I intended to dismantle my father down to the studs. I would strip him of his freedom, his reputation, and his future. I squeezed Clara's hand, gently kissed her forehead, and promised I would return soon. I stepped out of the room, closing the door on the quiet sanctuary she deserved to keep. I bypassed the reception desk and walked out into the facility courtyard. The humid Florida breeze rustled the palm fronds overhead. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed Maya. She answered on the second ring. "We are changing the strategy," I told my attorney, skipping the standard greetings. "Civil defense is over. We are initiating a scorched earth offensive." I recited the details of the billing ledger, the diverted railway pension, and the wire transfers to the Tampa litigation firm. I explained the timeline, proving Gregory weaponized his power of attorney to steal from an incapacitated senior citizen. Maya processed the information with lethal silence. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the sharp, deadly focus of a prosecutor scenting blood in the water. "In this state, elder financial exploitation is not a misdemeanor," Maya explained. "It is a severe felony carrying mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. If he diverted funds exceeding $50,000, we can trigger an immediate criminal investigation. The state attorney general takes a very aggressive stance against fiduciaries who cannibalize vulnerable adults." "Draft the criminal complaint," I instructed, pacing the length of the concrete courtyard. "Package the billing ledgers with the digital metadata Sarah provided last night. We will hand the authorities a fully assembled prosecution. I want Gregory answering to a criminal judge before the end of the month." "I will begin preparing the dossier," Maya confirmed. "But we face a severe logistical hurdle, Daria. Criminal filings, emergency injunctions, and forensic accounting require immediate capital. Your accounts remain frozen. The facility director gave you a 24-hour grace period to clear Clara's arrears. We cannot wait for the legal system to unfreeze your lottery payout. You need cash today, or Clara loses her room by tomorrow morning." I ran a hand through my hair, staring at the harsh afternoon sun. My emergency credit card was maxed out from the tire replacements and the initial retainer. I had zero liquid resources left to draw upon. "I have to secure a bridge loan," I decided aloud. Maya warned against the risk. Traditional lending institutions rarely authorize short-term capital against disputed lottery winnings, especially with active civil litigation flags on the applicant profile. "I do not need a traditional corporate approval," I replied. "I have a working relationship with a branch manager at a local commercial bank. We processed several high-value estate liquidations through his branch over the last 4 years. He knows my professional track record. If I offer a generous interest rate against the future payout, he might authorize an unsecured personal loan to cover the gap." "Go immediately," Maya advised. "Secure the survival funds. I will handle the criminal drafting." I ended the call and walked back to my car. I mapped the route to the commercial bank located in the heart of the downtown business district. I needed a specific dollar amount to satisfy the care facility ledger and keep my legal offense moving forward. I shifted the vehicle into drive and merged onto the coastal highway. I planned my negotiation strategy, rehearsing the financial terms I would present to the branch manager. My focus remained entirely locked on securing the bridge loan. I did not realize my movements were being monitored. I did not know Gregory had hired a private investigator to track my license plate, hoping to catch me transferring hidden assets. As I pulled into the bustling downtown banking plaza, I prepared to fight for a simple line of credit. I had no idea my father was already receiving a text message with my exact coordinates, preparing to spring a vicious ambush in the middle of a crowded lobby. I pushed through the heavy revolving doors of the downtown commercial bank. The transition from the stifling humidity to the crisp, conditioned air felt like stepping into a secure vault. The lobby featured polished marble floors, high vaulted ceilings, and the low, steady hum of financial transactions. It was a space designed for order. I walked toward the primary teller line. A young woman with a neat name tag reading Elena offered a polite professional smile. "I need to speak with Julian," I said, keeping my voice even. "I do not have an appointment, but he handles the commercial escrow accounts for my liquidation firm. Tell him Daria Howard is here regarding a short-term, collateralized bridge loan." Elena nodded, reaching for her desk phone. Her fingers never touched the receiver. "Do not process a single transaction for that woman." The command echoed across the cavernous marble lobby, striking the stone walls like a physical blow. The low hum of the bank vanished, instantly replaced by a stunned, ringing silence. Dozens of customers and bank employees turned their heads in unison. Gregory marched through the main entrance, He wore a dark, tailored suit clearly chosen to project authority and legitimacy. Flanking him was a stocky man in a rumpled gray blazer, holding a digital camera and a thick legal clipboard, the hired investigator. She is attempting to commit wire fraud. Gregory projected, ensuring his voice carried to the furthest corners of the room. He pointed an accusatory finger directly at my chest, closing the distance between the entrance and the teller counter with rapid, hostile strides. She is trying to move stolen funds offshore, lock down the terminal. He intended to create a spectacle. During my childhood, whenever I stepped out of line, Gregory used public humiliation as a weapon. He would berate me in grocery stores, restaurants, and school parking lots, relying on my natural instinct to shrink away from the stares of strangers. He assumed the embarrassment of a public criminal accusation would paralyze me. He reached the front of the line, invading my personal space. The private investigator flanked my left side, raising his camera. The shutter clicked rapidly, the harsh white flash reflecting off the polished marble. The tactic was clear: disorient, intimidate, overwhelm. You thought you could sneak into a bank and liquidate the family syndicate account? Gregory sneered, lowering his voice just enough to menace me while keeping his posture broad for the audience. We received the alert. You are cornered, Daria. The police are already on their way. He signaled to the investigator. The stocky man slapped a clipboard onto the teller counter right next to my handbag. A pen dangled from a silver chain. Sign the settlement release, Gregory demanded. Sign over the $45 million to the rightful trust, and I will call off the authorities. I will tell them it was a misunderstanding. If you refuse, they will arrest you for grand larceny right here in this lobby. I did not look at the clipboard. I did not look at the flashing camera. I analyzed the environment. Above the teller stations, 3 black glass domes protruded from the ceiling. Security cameras positioned to capture every angle of the transaction floor. I needed the digital record to reflect reality, not Gregory's fabricated narrative. If I yelled back, if I raised my hands in defense, the silent footage would depict a mutual altercation. It would look like 2 erratic individuals fighting over a financial dispute. I kept my arms resting casually at my sides. I maintained a relaxed, neutral facial expression. I took 2 slow, deliberate steps backward, removing myself entirely from his physical proximity. The movement forced Gregory to lean forward over the counter, his face reddening with manufactured outrage, his body language appearing undeniably aggressive. I turned my head slightly toward Elena. The young teller stood frozen behind the thick safety glass, her eyes wide with panic. Press the silent alarm, I instructed in a calm, quiet tone. He is erratic and poses a physical threat to the lobby. Elena blinked, breaking her paralysis. Her hand dropped beneath the counter. Gregory noticed the exchange. The realization that I was not signing the document fractured his carefully rehearsed performance. His manufactured authority dissolved into raw, uncontrolled fury. "Do not ignore me," he bellowed, slamming his fist against the marble counter. The sound cracked through the quiet room like a gunshot. A few customers near the entrance backed away, murmuring nervously. "You owe us that money. You owe us everything. You ungrateful, selfish thief." I did not speak a single word to him. I simply stood there, a quiet, immovable object in the center of his storm. My silence infuriated him more than any insult ever could. He craved a reaction. He needed my fear to validate his dominance. By denying him that response, I exposed him to the entire room, not as a wronged patriarch, but as an unhinged aggressor. The flashing blue and red lights reflected through the bank's front glass doors less than 3 minutes later. The downtown precinct sat only 2 blocks away. 2 uniformed police officers stepped into the lobby. Their hands rested near their utility belts, their eyes scanning the room to assess the threat level. Gregory immediately pivoted toward them, reverting to his salesman persona. He straightened his tie and offered a welcoming, authoritative nod. "Officers, thank goodness you are here," Gregory said, stepping toward them. "I am the one who called." "Step back, sir," the lead officer interrupted, raising a flat palm. The police did not see a respectable businessman. They saw a red-faced man sweating through his suit, pacing in a restricted area, accompanied by a photographer acting like a paparazzi hound. Then the officers looked at me. I stood several feet away, my breathing steady, my posture relaxed, showing no signs of distress or hostility. "Ma'am, are you unharmed?" the second officer asked, approaching me cautiously. "I am perfectly fine, officer," I replied, keeping my voice respectful and low. "I came here to apply for a standard commercial loan." That man ambushed me, began screaming, and slammed his fists on the counter. The teller felt threatened and triggered the alarm. You can review the ceiling cameras for confirmation. Gregory's jaw dropped. She is lying. She is stealing my lottery ticket. She is a criminal. "Sir, lower your voice," the lead officer commanded, stepping into Gregory's path. "This is a bank, not a boxing ring. If you have a civil dispute, take it to a courtroom." "You do not understand," Gregory insisted, stepping closer to the officer, pointing a finger at my face. "I have the paperwork right here. She needs to sign it." The officer did not appreciate the physical encroachment. He grabbed Gregory by the bicep, applying immediate, firm pressure. The second officer mirrored the movement on Gregory's other side. "You are causing a public disturbance," the lead officer stated, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. "You are leaving these premises right now. If you return, you will be arrested for trespassing and harassment. Walk." They marched Gregory toward the exit. The private investigator, realizing the situation had imploded, quickly tucked his camera away and scurried out the doors ahead of them. Gregory tried to twist his shoulders, struggling against the officer's grip. He looked back through the heavy glass doors as they escorted him onto the hot pavement. Our eyes met through the transparent barrier. The performative anger was gone from his face. In its place was a flicker of genuine, rattling uncertainty. The public shame tactic had failed spectacularly. He realized I was no longer the frightened 19-year-old girl he could bully into submission. He realized he had just provided the police with a documented incident of harassment, strengthening my forthcoming legal counteroffensive. The lobby remained quiet for a few seconds before the normal hum of activity slowly resumed. Customers returned to their deposit slips. Elena let out a long, shaky exhale behind the glass. A heavy wooden door opened behind the teller line. Julian, the branch manager, stepped out. He wore a sharp navy suit and an expression of profound apology. He had watched the entire altercation through the glass walls of his elevated office. Daria, Julian said, walking around the counter to greet me personally. "I am incredibly sorry about that disruption. Security is keeping him off the block." "It is a complicated week, Julian," I said, smoothing the front of my shirt. "I apologize for bringing the chaos to your floor." "Nonsense," he replied, gesturing toward his private office. "Please, come sit down. Elena mentioned you need to discuss a collateralized bridge loan." I followed him into the quiet, soundproof room and took a seat in a leather chair. I laid out the financial reality. I explained the temporary legal freeze on the $45 million payout. I presented my 4-year ledger of successful estate liquidations as proof of my fiscal responsibility. I offered him a highly favorable interest rate in exchange for a short-term, unsecured line of credit to cover my Aunt Clara's facility arrears and my legal retainer. Julian reviewed my professional file. He knew my work ethic. He had witnessed my composure under fire just moments ago. He did not hesitate. He authorized the transfer of funds into a secure, newly minted account unattached to my flagged Social Security profile. I walked out of the bank 30 minutes later with the survival capital secured. Clara's room was safe. Maya's retainer was fully funded. I sat in my car, staring at the steering wheel. I had survived another ambush. I had parried the attacks from Gregory Nolan and Sterling, but playing defense was exhausting, and it left the initiative in their hands. They would keep coming, launching strike after strike, hoping one of their blows would eventually land. I pulled out my phone and dialed Maya's number. It was time to stop waiting for the next ambush. It was time to draw them out into the open. We needed to offer them a target too enticing to ignore, a trap disguised as a surrender. "Call their respective legal counsels," I instructed the moment Maya answered the phone. Tell them I am ready to negotiate a surrender." Maya let out a low hum of approval over the speaker. She did not require a lengthy explanation to understand the tactical pivot. She knew the commercial bridge loan provided us with the necessary capital to strike, but hunting our enemies individually offered them a chance to scatter. If we indicted Gregory for elder abuse today, Sterling would realize the danger, destroy his own fraudulent corporate ledgers, and vanish into the wind. We needed every single predator confined inside the exact same enclosure. We engineered a global mediation conference. Maya drafted the preliminary correspondence with masterful deception. She initiated contact with the aggressive Tampa litigation firm representing my father. Instead of projecting our usual ironclad confidence, she adopted the weary, strained tone of an attorney managing a frantic, breaking client. She leaked the exact narrative we wanted them to consume. She hinted that the sudden freeze on my personal banking assets had paralyzed my defense strategy. She subtly suggested the viral true crime podcast broadcast had shattered my psychological endurance. I was supposedly crumbling under the intense weight of community hatred, targeted vandalism, and imminent bankruptcy. The offer Maya presented was incredibly lucrative. She proposed a consolidated settlement agreement. I would voluntarily surrender 40% of the $45 million jackpot to the fabricated family syndicate. In exchange, Gregory, Helen, and Nolan must drop all civil claims, release the injunctions, and sign a permanent non-disparagement clause. Maya then executed the second phase of the lure. She placed a separate call to the corporate attorney representing my former employer. She spun a similar web of manufactured desperation. She claimed I was terrified of facing felony embezzlement charges regarding the fictional petty cash incident. I offered to release my employment counterclaims and yield a significant portion of the winnings if Sterling formally withdrew the criminal threat and signed a separate liability release. We set the hook. We waited for their greed to override their professional caution. The wait lasted less than 2 hours. Human avarice operates on a highly predictable schedule. Opposing counsels flooded Maya's inbox with rapid, eager replies. Gregory felt entirely vindicated. He assumed his theatrical ambush inside the bank lobby served as the final crushing blow to my resilience. He believed the public shame and the threat of arrest had successfully broken my spirit. Nolan likely assumed his extortion attempt at the diner pushed me over the edge. Sterling believed his institutional power and judicial connections had terrified a vulnerable employee into submission. They smelled blood in the water. They demanded an emergency-mediated deposition for 9 o'clock the following morning, intent on carving up the prize before I could recover my nerve. They agreed to convene at a neutral arbitration facility located in the downtown business district. They eagerly waived standard discovery delays and mandatory cooling-off periods. They wanted the binding settlement release forms signed, notarized, and filed with the State Lottery Commission before the weekend arrived. Growing up, my father constantly lectured me about my supposed character flaws. He insisted my greatest failing was an inability to bend the knee to authority. He categorized any independent thought as insolence. By offering this substantial financial compromise, I played directly into his bloated ego. He viewed the proposed settlement not as a negotiation, but as a mandatory tribute. He saw it as a disobedient child finally learning her proper place in the hierarchy. Sterling operated under a similar delusion. A man who amassed a small fortune by skimming valuable heirlooms from grieving widows simply viewed me as another easy mark. He considered my capitulation a standard business transaction, the natural outcome of applying superior leverage against a weaker opponent. The sun dipped below the Florida horizon, casting long, dark shadows across my quiet suburban neighborhood. I stood inside my bedroom, the air conditioning humming a steady rhythm against the oppressive evening heat. I retrieved a heavy metal ironing board from the hall closet and unfolded it near the foot of my bed. I pulled a charcoal gray wool suit from a plastic dry cleaning garment bag. I purchased this specific ensemble 3 years ago for my very first high-stakes estate auction. It projected competence armor and lethal professionalism. I filled the iron reservoir with distilled water. I plugged the device into the wall outlet, waiting for the internal heating element to reach maximum capacity. I laid the wool trousers flat across the padded board. I pressed the hot iron against the fabric. A hiss of white steam billowed upward, carrying the sharp, clean scent of heated fabric. I moved the iron with slow, methodical precision. I established a razor-sharp crease down the center of each leg. The repetitive, rhythmic, physical motion anchored my racing mind. I was smoothing out the chaos, preparing for a flawless execution. I did not feel any lingering fear. The terrified 19-year-old girl who slept on a concrete bus station bench no longer existed. I had shed that victimhood completely. I had spent 15 years evaluating the worth of discarded things, and I finally understood my own undeniable value. Sitting on the quilted bedspread beside my ironing station rested a thick, unmarked manila envelope. The exterior looked ordinary. The interior contained a slaughterhouse. Inside that envelope lay the digital flash drive provided by Sarah. It held the altered system metadata, the forged timestamps, and the fabricated drafts of the family syndicate email chain. It possessed the power to send Gregory to federal prison for perjury and evidence tampering. Next to the drive rested the transcribed audio file from the Coastal Diner, the exact conversation where Nolan confessed to witnessing the forgery, attempted to extort me for $5 million, and fully incriminated our father in a criminal conspiracy. Beneath those items sat the printed financial ledgers I obtained from the Coastal Care Center, the routing numbers and wire transfer receipts, proving Gregory systematically drained Aunt Clara's railway pension to fund his aggressive Tampa litigation firm. The undeniable proof of felony elder financial exploitation carrying mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. Finally, I included the high-resolution photographs of the convenience store security footage secured by Maya's investigative team. The images clearly captured me sliding my personal debit card into the chip reader, obliterating Sterling's claim that I purchased the winning ticket with company cash. I finished pressing the jacket lapels, ensuring they laid perfectly flat against my chest. I hung the suit on the closet door, inspecting the clean, uncompromising lines. Tomorrow morning, my parents, my brother, and my former boss would walk into a sterile conference room. They expected to find a broken, defeated woman ready to sign away her future to beg for mercy. They anticipated a coronation, ready to divide my $45 million among themselves while congratulating each other on a successful campaign of terror. They were walking into a sealed vault, and I held the only key. I turned off the iron and unplugged the cord. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of cold water. The house was quiet, peaceful, and entirely mine. The digital clock on the microwave glowed with the late evening hour. I thought about Aunt Clara sitting by the window in her care facility, oblivious to the fact that her own brother had tried to sacrifice her life for a payout. I thought about Sarah, trapped in a loveless, dangerous marriage, waiting for the signal to escape with her young son. I thought about the thousands of strangers who listened to a podcast and decided I was a villain worthy of harassment and property damage. Every single one of those injustices would be rectified tomorrow. The trap was perfectly set, the bait was swallowed whole, and the execution was only hours away. I set the water glass in the sink and walked down the hallway to get some sleep. The war concludes tomorrow, and I intended to be fully rested when I delivered the final blow. I walked into the arbitration suite on the 14th floor of the Downtown Legal Center. The room featured a long, polished oak table and a wall of floor-to-ceiling windows framing the sunlit Tampa skyline. Gregory, Helen, Nolan, and Sterling already occupied the far side of the table. Their respective legal teams flanked them, forming a unified wall of expensive suits and leather briefcases. Maya sat beside me at the opposite end, arranging her files with quiet precision. A court reporter sat at the head of the table, adjusting a digital microphone array to capture every spoken syllable. The appointed mediator cleared his throat to initiate the proceedings. He outlined the rules of the emergency deposition, reminding all parties that the session was being recorded and transcribed. He emphasized that the testimony provided today carried the exact same legal weight as testimony delivered inside a federal courtroom. He then administered the official oath. Every person in the room raised their right hand and swore to tell the whole truth under penalty of perjury. Gregory leaned toward his microphone first. He smoothed his silk tie, projecting the image of a reasonable patriarch seeking a fair compromise after a difficult family dispute. He repeated his narrative, outlining the creation of the family lottery syndicate. He stated the exact dates and times he supposedly emailed me the binding terms. He presented a printed stack of the forged emails, sliding them across the table to be entered into the official deposition record as a primary exhibit. He spoke with unwavering confidence, secure in the belief that my presence in this room signaled my total defeat. He looked at me, expecting to see the frightened 19-year-old girl he banished 15 years ago. Sterling followed. He spoke with the polished authority of a seasoned corporate executive accustomed to dictating terms. He recounted the estate liquidation timeline, claiming, "I discovered a hidden metal lockbox full of untraceable client cash while clearing out a historic property." He testified that his internal company ledger reflected a discrepancy matching the exact retail cost of the winning lottery ticket. He entered his fabricated employment violation claim into the record, citing specific clauses from my original hiring contract regarding misappropriated job site assets. He looked across the table, offering a brief, patronizing smile. He thought he was minutes away from securing a multi-million-dollar payday without lifting a finger. Maya did not cross-examine them immediately. She allowed their lies to settle into the official transcript, cementing their perjury into the permanent legal record. Then she stood up and walked to the audiovisual control panel set into the side wall. She lowered a wide projector screen from the ceiling and connected her secure laptop. She addressed Sterling first. She pulled a high-definition still image onto the bright screen. It was a zoomed-in frame from the convenience store security camera provided by the private investigator my brother had bribed. The timestamp in the lower corner read 12:14 in the afternoon. The image clearly showed my hand sliding a bright blue personal bank debit card into the chip reader. Maya stated for the official record that the certified financial statements matching that exact debit card verified a personal transaction of $6 at that specific location. She noted that Sterling just committed perjury by claiming company cash was used to purchase the ticket. She informed the room that filing a false civil claim to extort a former employee constituted a severe breach of the law. Sterling froze. The patronizing smile vanished from his face, replaced by a mask of sudden, pale shock. His corporate attorney turned a shade of gray, realizing his client had just lied under oath and submitted a fraudulent legal claim on the record. The attorney shifted his chair, creating physical distance between himself and his client. Maya did not give them time to recover their footing. She clicked a button on a remote presenter, turning her attention to Gregory and Nolan. She projected the digital metadata extracted from the flash drive Sarah provided the night before. The screen displayed lines of raw code exposing the true creation date of the email thread Gregory had just sworn was authentic. Maya pointed out with clinical precision that the files were generated exactly 3 days ago. She highlighted the registry logs, proving the documents were crafted on an outdated operating system registered to my father residential internet protocol address. Gregory stiffened in his leather chair. His posture turned rigid. Helen gripped the edge of the oak table, her knuckles turning a stark white as the reality of their exposure set in. Maya then pressed play on a digital audio file. Nolan's voice filled the conference room, bouncing off the glass walls. The recording from the Coastal Diner played in pristine clarity. Nolan bragged about watching Gregory manipulate the computer clock to fake the timestamps. Nolan confessed to conspiring to extort $5 million from me in exchange for his silence regarding the forgery. The recording captured him threatening to ruin me if I refused to pay his ransom. The unified wall across the table fractured instantly into chaotic pieces. Sterling glared at Gregory with pure disgust. Sterling realized he had allied himself with a rank amateur who fabricated digital evidence, leaving a glaring electronic trail. Sterling understood his own civil suit was now legally tainted by association with a criminal fraud conspiracy. He muttered a sharp curse under his breath, gripping the edge of the table. Gregory turned his fury toward Nolan. The patriarch realized his golden child had sold him out for a separate clandestine payout. Gregory slammed his palm on the table, demanding to know how Nolan could betray his own blood. He accused his son of incompetence and disloyalty, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. Nolan stood up, shoving his heavy chair backward across the carpet. He shouted over his father, accusing Gregory of dragging the entire family into a federal wire fraud trap. Nolan pointed at the projector screen, claiming he only tried to secure his own survival because the original plan was hopelessly sloppy. He paced behind his chair, panic radiating from every movement, knowing the illegal sports betting ring in Miami was still waiting for their money. Helen began to cry. It was not the performative theater she utilized for the true crime podcast broadcast. It was a raw, ugly sound born of genuine terror. She looked at the court reporter who continued typing every single frantic, panicked confession into the binding legal transcript, capturing the implosion of the Howard family in real time. I sat back in my chair. I reached for the glass water pitcher resting in the center of the table. I poured cold water into my glass. I took a slow, deliberate sip. I watched the people who spent 15 years abusing, manipulating, and discarding me tear each other apart like cornered animals. I felt nothing but a clean, surgical detachment. I observed their panic the same way I would evaluate a cracked vase at an estate sale, noting the fatal flaws and recognizing the item held zero remaining value. The opposing attorneys began shouting over their clients, instructing them to stop talking immediately. The mediator banged a small wooden gavel, trying to restore order to a room that had descended into a frantic brawl. The legal counsels recognized the catastrophic ethical danger of the situation. Their clients were generating fresh evidence of criminal conspiracy with every word they screamed at one another. Maya let the chaos burn for a full 2 minutes. Then she raised her hand, demanding the floor. The sharp, unwavering authority in her gesture silenced the room, cutting through the shouting. She looked directly at the opposing legal counsels. She informed them that the settlement offer was officially withdrawn. The bait had served its purpose. She stated that by the end of the business day, she would file formal complaints with the district attorney. She listed the impending charges one by one, letting each term hang in the quiet room like a falling blade. Perjury, wire fraud, extortion, conspiracy to commit grand larceny, defamation per se. Maya then turned her gaze to Gregory. She saved the final lethal blow for the patriarch. She slid a thin manila folder across the polished wood until it stopped directly in front of his folded hands. She informed the room that the most severe filing would be directed at Gregory alone. She detailed the financial records recovered from the Coastal Care Facility. She stated that the state attorney general would be receiving an expedited referral regarding felony elder financial exploitation. She noted that Gregory diverted a protected railway pension to fund this exact frivolous lawsuit, leaving a cognitively impaired senior citizen facing imminent eviction. She reminded him that elder abuse carried mandatory minimum prison sentences in the state of Florida. Gregory collapsed back into his chair. The breath left his lungs in a hollow wheeze. He looked at the folder sitting untouched in front of him. He knew the paper trail was undeniable. The arrogance that defined his entire existence shattered, leaving a hollow, terrified old man staring at the ruins of his own life. He had traded his freedom for a chance to steal from a daughter he had already thrown away. The corporate attorney representing Sterling closed his leather briefcase with a loud, definitive snap. He stood up and announced he was terminating his representation of his client, effective immediately, citing a direct ethical conflict of interest caused by perjury on the record. He walked out of the room without looking back, leaving his former employer stranded and defenseless. The litigation firm representing my family scrambled to gather their documents. They advised Gregory and Nolan to invoke their constitutional right to remain silent and refused to answer any further questions from the mediator. They began packing their bags, eager to distance themselves from a client destined for a federal indictment. The deposition was over. The siege was broken. I stood up and smoothed the front of my charcoal wool suit. I picked up my handbag from the floor. I did not offer them a parting word or a triumphant smile. They were no longer threats. They were just ghosts from a past I had finally laid to rest. I turned and walked toward the heavy glass doors, preparing to reclaim my public narrative. I pushed open the heavy soundproof door of the broadcasting studio just 2 hours after leaving the arbitration suite. The host sat behind a wide, curved desk surrounded by acoustic foam panels and expensive recording equipment. His name was Donovan. He built a lucrative career dissecting local scandals for an audience hungry for daily drama. A glowing red sign illuminated the wall, indicating we were broadcasting live to hundreds of thousands of listeners across the state. Donovan wore a crisp button-down shirt and a practiced look of skeptical authority. He expected me to arrive defensive, angry, and prone to emotional outbursts. He wanted a screaming match to boost his ratings and generate viral sound bites. I took the guest chair and placed a thick black leather portfolio onto the desk. I adjusted the microphone stand, bringing the foam filter level with my mouth. Donovan leaned into his microphone. He wasted no time attempting to trap me. He played a brief audio clip from his previous episode featuring Helen weeping over her supposedly stolen retirement funds. The sound of my mother crying filled the small booth, echoing through the high-fidelity speakers. Donovan lowered the volume and looked at me, demanding to know how I could justify leaving the woman who raised me in financial ruin. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend my character or ask for sympathy. I unclasped the metal rings of the portfolio and turned to the first tab. I read the official case number from the preliminary criminal filing Maya submitted to the district attorney that afternoon. I stated the exact date, 15 years prior, when Gregory and Helen walked into a predatory lending office and forged my signature on a loan application. I explained the mechanics of the betrayal, detailing how the stolen capital bailed Nolan out of a felony charge while destroying my credit score. I read the eviction notice terms that forced a 19-year-old girl onto the street to protect her older brother from the consequences of his own reckless choices. Donovan shifted in his chair. The skeptical authority vanished from his posture, replaced by a cautious silence. He recognized the difference between a fabricated emotional story and certified legal documentation. I turned to the second tab in the portfolio. I did not let the host interject. I owned the narrative now. I informed the listeners that my parents did not possess a retirement fund for me to steal. I stated they were currently facing federal indictment for a much darker crime. I read the routing numbers and the transaction dates from the Coastal Care Center ledger. I detailed how Gregory weaponized his durable power of attorney to siphon an 82-year-old woman railway pension into his private accounts. I explained that while Helen cried on this very podcast about imaginary thefts, her husband was actively starving his own sister to fund a frivolous lawsuit against me. I held up the printed wire transfer receipts, ensuring the studio cameras captured the undeniable proof of their elder financial exploitation. The color drained from Donovan's face. He recognized the profound legal and professional danger he had stepped into. He had provided a platform for a coordinated extortion attempt. He had broadcasted verified defamation to a vast audience. To save his own career and credibility, he needed to distance himself from my parents immediately. Donovan pivoted with ruthless efficiency. He turned his attention away from me and spoke directly into the camera recording the visual feed. He addressed his listeners, instructing them to direct their outrage toward the true predators. He dismantled Helen Performance, labeling it a masterclass in sociopathic manipulation. He condemned Gregory's actions, calling the theft of a vulnerable senior citizen pension a grotesque betrayal of human decency. The public response was instantaneous. My phone rested on the desk screen facing upward. I watched the live stream comment feed scroll past at a dizzying speed. The same digital mob that slashed my tires yesterday reversed their direction entirely. The anger funneled directly toward the pristine suburban home where my parents resided. The fallout struck them before the hour concluded. My phone buzzed with automated news alerts and forwarded messages from old acquaintances eager to share the destruction. The Homeowners Association president sent Gregory an email demanding his immediate resignation from the neighborhood board, citing a zero-tolerance policy for criminal fraud. Their exclusive country club revoked their membership, invoking the moral turpitude clause in their bylaws to lock them out of the dining room. Longtime friends blocked their numbers, refusing to be associated with individuals facing prison time for elder abuse. Gregory and Helen became outcasts in their own meticulously curated social circle, exiled by the very public they tried to weaponize against me. Donovan leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. He asked me a final question. He wanted to know what I intended to do with the $45 million now that the truth was exposed and my tormentors were facing justice. I closed the black leather portfolio. I looked directly into the camera lens. I announced the creation of a nonprofit charitable foundation. I stated I was dedicating $5 million of my initial payout to establish a legal defense fund specifically designed to assist victims of familial financial abuse. I named it the Clara Defense Initiative in honor of my aunt. I explained the charity would provide immediate retainer capital for vulnerable adults and estranged children fighting predatory relatives in court. I wanted to ensure no 19-year-old girl ever had to sleep on a bus station bench because she lacked the funds to hire an attorney. I cemented my position not as a greedy daughter hoarding wealth, but as a survivor, turning a personal nightmare into a shield for others. I stripped away their false narrative, leaving them with nothing but the ugly truth of their own greed. I thanked Donovan for the platform, stood up, and walked out of the studio. The air outside felt lighter. The court of public opinion was officially conquered. My reputation was restored, and the people who tried to destroy me were drowning in the consequences of their own actions. But cornering a predator leaves them with very few options. Stripped of their social standing, facing imminent federal indictments, and drowning in Nolan illegal sports betting debts, the men in my family realized the legal route was permanently closed. The arbitration room disaster and the podcast reversal eliminated any chance of securing a settlement. They were out of time and out of leverage. Nolan knew the enforcers from the Miami bookmaker were coming for his collateral. Gregory knew his bank accounts would soon be frozen by the state attorney general pending the elder abuse investigation. They needed liquid cash tonight to escape the trap they built for themselves. Desperation breeds catastrophic decisions. The illusion of civilized behavior evaporated, leaving only raw panic and the urgent need to survive. As the sun set over the Florida coastline, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and dark orange, my father and my brother prepared to make one final, fatal mistake. The kettle hissed, a thin stream of white vapor rising toward the dark ceiling. I poured the boiling water over a bundle of dried chamomile leaves, watching the liquid turn a pale golden hue. The digital display on my oven glowed, marking the time at exactly midnight. My house was silent, insulated against the heavy, humid Florida night. To catch a predator, you do not build a wall. You open a door and place the exact bait they crave inside the threshold. Earlier this week, during my final supervised visit to the liquidation facility to collect my remaining reference books, I engaged in a piece of calculated theater. I stepped into the loading bay, ensuring the inventory manager stood within earshot. I initiated a fake phone call to Maya. I raised my voice just enough to project panic. I spoke rapidly about securing a substantial commercial bridge loan, claiming I converted a large portion into untraceable physical cash. I explicitly stated I hid the currency inside the obsolete floor safe buried beneath the main appraisal stage, intending to keep it concealed from the impending asset freeze. It was an absurd premise. No rational person would store a fortune inside an abandoned industrial safe at a hostile workplace. But Gregory and Nolan were no longer rational. They were drowning. Nolan had mere hours before the Miami enforcers arrived to collect their pound of flesh. Gregory faced imminent asset seizure the moment the Attorney General filed the elder exploitation charges. The rumor of immediate liquid capital blinded them to the obvious tactical flaws. The inventory manager undoubtedly relayed the information to Sterling, who, paralyzed by his own looming corporate fraud scandal, likely passed the intelligence to my father, hoping Gregory would commit the burglary and eliminate the problem for everyone. I picked up my ceramic mug and walked into the living room. I did not turn on the overhead lights. I sat in my favorite armchair, letting the ambient glow from the street lamps filter through the window blinds. My phone vibrated against the glass coffee table. The screen illuminated, displaying a stark red banner. Perimeter Breach Sector 4. 3 weeks ago, when I first discovered Sterling falsifying the estate ledgers, I took precautionary measures to protect the inventory I personally curated. I hired a private security contractor to upgrade the warehouse surveillance matrix. We installed high-definition infrared lenses and a silent direct-line tripwire system linked straight to the county dispatch center. When Sterling terminated my employment, he forgot to revoke my administrative access to the security portal. He underestimated my thoroughness. I tapped the notification banner. The application opened buffering for a fraction of a second before displaying a grid of live video feeds. I selected the camera positioned above the rear loading dock. The infrared filter rendered the scene in crisp, monochromatic shades of gray and white. Nolan stood near the secondary glass entry door. He held a heavy, steel tire iron gripped tightly in both hands. He swung the tool backward and drove it into the reinforced pane. The glass did not shatter instantly. It spiderwebbed, holding its shape until he struck it a second, third, and fourth time. The barrier finally gave way, raining sharp fragments onto the concrete floor. Nolan reached through the jagged opening, twisting the interior deadbolt. He yanked the door open. Gregory followed him inside. The patriarch of the Howard family, the man who spent decades lecturing me about moral superiority and the importance of reputation, was now trespassing in a commercial warehouse in the middle of the night. He wielded a cheap plastic flashlight, the narrow beam cutting erratic paths through the dusty air. I switched the view to the primary showroom camera. The lens captured the vast, cavernous interior, filled with antique furniture, vintage artwork, and estate heirlooms. The two men moved with frantic, clumsy urgency. They did not look like master thieves. They looked like terrified scavengers. Gregory tripped over the edge of a rolled Persian rug, stumbling forward and knocking a 19th century mahogany side table to the ground. The delicate wooden legs splintered upon impact. He did not pause to assess the damage. He scrambled upright, his tailored suit coated in a thick layer of industrial dust. They navigated toward the raised appraisal stage. Nolan dropped the tire iron, the metal clattering loudly against the floorboards. He fell to his knees, clawing at the heavy acoustic panels skirting the base of the platform. He tore the fabric away, exposing the dark recess beneath the wood. Gregory shined the flashlight into the cavity. The beam illuminated the heavy steel door of the obsolete floor safe. I watched Nolan pull a battery-powered angle grinder from a canvas duffel bag. He intended to cut through the hinges, a noisy, time-consuming process that proved he had no understanding of modern security protocols. The silent alarm had triggered the moment the exterior glass fractured. The dispatch center already had their coordinates. I took a slow sip of my chamomile tea. The warm liquid settled in my stomach, providing a soothing contrast to the frantic destruction playing out on my glowing screen. Sparks flew from the angle grinder, lighting Nolan's face in brief, harsh flashes. His jaw was clenched, his eyes wide with a feverish intensity. He was cutting through solid steel to retrieve a phantom treasure, risking a decade in a state penitentiary to pay off a gambling debt. Gregory stood directly behind him, shifting his weight from foot to foot, constantly checking his watch. The former salesman was reduced to a nervous lookout. They operated under the delusion that they still controlled the narrative. They believed their actions remained hidden in the dark, confident they could simply take what they needed and walk away clean. They never considered that the scapegoat they banished 15 years ago now engineered the architecture of their downfall. Through the live audio feed, I heard a sound over the grinding metal, a sharp squealing noise echoing from the front parking lot, rubber tires skidding across asphalt. Gregory heard it too. He tapped Nolan on the shoulder, pointing the flashlight toward the front of the building. Nolan stopped the grinder. The warehouse plunged into a sudden, eerie quiet. The darkness outside the tall front windows vanished. The interior of the liquidation firm was instantly bathed in a strobing, rhythmic pattern of blue and red light. The reflections danced across the polished wood furniture and the vintage mirrors, transforming the showroom into a surreal, flashing theater. Nolan dropped the grinder. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. He took a step backward, raising his hands to his head. He recognized the lights. He knew the enforcers waiting outside did not belong to a Miami bookmaker. The heavy front doors flew open. The glass panes rattled inside their steel frames. 4 uniformed officers from the Florida State Police breached the threshold. Their tactical flashlights pierced the gloom, pinning Gregory and Nolan in blinding, intersecting beams. The lead officer shouted a command, his voice echoing off the high tin ceiling. The directive was clear, sharp, and left zero room for negotiation. He ordered both men to drop to the floor and lace their fingers behind their heads. Gregory froze. For a fleeting second, his posture stiffened, a dying reflex of his inherent arrogance. He opened his mouth, likely preparing to offer a charismatic excuse, preparing to spin a web of lies to talk his way out of the consequences. The officer drew his sidearm, the metallic click echoing through the cavernous space. He repeated the command, louder this time. The patriarch folded. Gregory sank to his knees, the expensive fabric of his trousers soaking up the grime of the warehouse floor. He laid flat on his stomach, resting his cheek against the cold concrete. Nolan mirrored his movements, sobbing openly, his shoulders shaking, as the reality of his impending incarceration crushed the last remnants of his golden child persona. I watched the officers close the distance. They holstered their weapons and drew their restraints. The audio feed picked up the distinct ratcheting sound of steel handcuffs locking around Gregory's wrists, followed immediately by the same sound securing Nolan. The officers hoisted them upward, parading them past the shattered mahogany table and the ruined Persian rug. The flashing blue and red lights illuminated their faces as they were marched toward the exit. Their expressions were identical. They looked hollow, ruined, and profoundly small. Their greed had officially stripped them of their freedom. They forfeited their lives chasing a rumor, choosing to break into a building to steal from the very person they spent a lifetime destroying. I tapped the screen, closing the security application. The room faded back to black, lit only by the ambient glow from the street. I finished my tea, setting the empty mug on the glass table. The trap had sprung. The prey was captured, and the board was finally clear. The war was over, leaving only the task of rebuilding the peace in the morning light. The morning sun crested the Atlantic horizon, spilling pale gold light across my kitchen counter. I sat on the same stool where Sarah had wept days earlier, holding a fresh cup of dark roast coffee. My laptop rested open in front of me, the digital banking portal loaded with a soft chime. The bright red security banner was gone. The freeze was lifted. A federal judge signed the release orders at 8 o'clock Standard Time. Maya facilitated the transfer through the State Lottery Commission escrow. The screen displayed a single, undeniable green line of text. $45 million sat in a secured, diversified trust account bearing my name. The $312 balance that previously mocked my existence had vanished, replaced by an impenetrable fortress of capital. I did not cheer. I did not pour champagne. I simply closed the laptop, finished my coffee, and prepared for the day. Wealth, I realized, is not a personality trait. It is a utility. It is the distance you can put between yourself and the people who wish to do you harm. The Florida criminal justice system processed Gregory and Nolan with ruthless efficiency. I attended their initial arraignment hearing sitting in the back row of the gallery alongside Maya. The courtroom felt sterile, smelling of polished wood and industrial floor wax. My father and my brother shuffled into the defendant enclosure, wearing matching Orange County Jail uniforms. Their wrists and ankles were bound by heavy chains that clinked with every step. The swagger was gone. The entitlement had evaporated. The presiding judge read the formal indictment into the permanent record. Gregory faced several severe felony charges, including commercial burglary, perjury, wire fraud, and the most devastating count, elder financial exploitation. Due to his attempt to tamper with evidence and his clear flight risk, the judge denied bail. Gregory slumped forward, resting his forehead against the defense table, finally understanding that his pristine suburban life was permanently over. He traded his freedom for a failed attempt to steal from a daughter he banished 15 years ago. Nolan stood beside him, weeping silently. His luxury watch was locked in a police evidence room. His tailored designer suits were replaced by rough cotton. He faced identical burglary charges, compounded by extortion and conspiracy. The illegal sports betting ring in Miami no longer cared about his debt because dead collateral locked inside a state penitentiary offered them zero return on investment. Sterling experienced a parallel destruction. The morning after the warehouse break-in, state investigators executed a search warrant on the liquidation firm. The forensic auditors bypassed the main showroom and went straight for the rear storage cages. They discovered the 19th century silver tea service, the pristine first edition novels, and a ledger detailing years of hidden off-book sales. The state seized the limited liability company assets, freezing his accounts and preparing an extensive indictment for corporate fraud. Sterling lost his business, his reputation, and his freedom in a single sweep. With the predators neutralized, I focused my attention on the survivors. I met Sarah in a quiet diner on the outskirts of the county line. She looked different. The deep exhaustion that bruised her eyes had lightened. She held Liam by the hand. Her son was a bright, energetic 7-year-old boy who knew nothing about the darkness his father had invited into their lives. I handed Sarah a thick envelope. Inside was an untraceable cashier check large enough to purchase a home outright in a new state, fund Liam education through college, and provide a comfortable cushion for the next decade. Next to the check rested a binder containing finalized divorce decrees and full sole custody paperwork expedited by the premier family law attorney Maya retained on her behalf. Sarah took the envelope. Her hands trembled, but this time the tremor originated from profound relief rather than terror. She pulled me into a tight embrace, whispering her gratitude against my shoulder. I watched them walk out to a packed rental car. They drove north, crossing the state line, leaving the toxic Howard legacy in the rearview mirror forever. My next destination required a scenic drive along the coastal highway. I navigated toward a private, high-end senior care facility situated on a picturesque bluff overlooking the ocean. The architecture featured wide, wraparound verandas, lush botanical gardens, and floor-to-ceiling windows that let the sea breeze filter through the hallways. It resembled a luxury resort rather than a medical institution. I walked into a spacious, sunlit private suite. Aunt Clara sat in a plush armchair watching the waves crash against the shoreline below. Her new room smelled of fresh linen and salt water. A dedicated, highly trained nursing staff monitored her health around the clock, funded entirely by an irrevocable trust I established the day my funds cleared. Gregory would never touch a single dime of her pension again. I pulled a chair beside her and took her frail hand. She turned her head, offering that familiar, warm smile. The fog of her dementia remained, but the underlying tension, the fear of eviction and neglect, had vanished. She hummed her quiet melody, squeezing my fingers. I sat with her for an hour, watching the tide roll in, fulfilling the silent vow I made when I promised to protect her. 6 months later, the dust fully settled. The local news cycle moved on to new scandals. The viral podcast episode faded into digital obscurity. The public forgot my name, which was exactly what I preferred. I did not purchase a sprawling mega mansion. I did not buy a fleet of exotic sports cars or designer wardrobes. I stood inside a beautiful mid-century modern estate located in a quiet, historic district. I wore comfortable jeans and a simple cotton shirt. I held a brass appraisal loop to my eye, inspecting the hallmark etched into the base of a vintage brass lamp. I was back at work. I had launched my own independent liquidation firm, taking clients on my own terms, ensuring every grieving family received an honest, transparent accounting of their heirlooms. The $45 million did not alter my personality. It did not change my passions or my daily routine. It simply served as the ultimate impenetrable armor against the people who tried to break me. It bought me the privilege of silence. I finished cataloging the living room, packed my reference books into my satchel, and locked the estate doors behind me. I drove back to my modest, peaceful coastal home. The neighborhood was quiet, the air thick with the scent of blooming jasmine. I walked up the front steps, unlocked the deadbolt, and stepped inside. I closed the heavy wooden door, turning the lock with a satisfying, definitive click. The ghosts of my past were locked outside, unable to cross the threshold ever again. I had executed the perfect, flawless defense. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever stood your ground against the people who were supposed to protect you, remember that your peace is worth defending at any cost. Drop a comment below, tell me your story, and hit subscribe for more journeys of quiet resilience. Until next time, keep your boundaries strong and never let anyone tell you what you are worth.